This mother bear refused to leave the door of this home. Because of an alone child, the reason. Put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The moonlight cast long shadows across the small wooden house that stood at the edge of Pine Hollow, a tiny village nestled between ancient forest and rolling meadows. Most homes had gone dark hours ago, their occupants deep in slumber. But at the Marshall residence, a single light still burned in the kitchen window, flickering occasionally as if struggling to stay awake. Inside, 5-year-old Noah Marshall sat alone on the living room floor, his small fingers clutching a worn teddy bear. His eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, remained fixed on the front door. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, each second stretching into what felt like hours for the young boy. His mother, Savannah, had promised to be back before bedtime. She had tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered that Mrs. Carter next door would check on him soon, but Mrs. Carter never came, and his mother never returned. Noah had waited patiently at first, then with growing anxiety as the house creaked and groaned around him. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, and strange noises made him huddle deeper into his dinosaur pajamas. He had crept out of bed an hour ago, unable to sleep, hoping that maybe his mother had come home while he dozed. "Mommy," he called out softly, his voice trembling in the empty house. No answer came. Outside, unseen by the child, a massive shadow moved through the yard. A large black bear, her dark fur nearly invisible in the night, approached the house with unusual purpose. Wildlife wasn't uncommon in Pine Hollow, but bears rarely ventured this close to human dwellings, especially not with such deliberate intent. The bear stopped at the front porch, her powerful frame illuminated briefly by moonlight. She was enormous, standing over 6 feet tall when on her hind legs, with a distinctive white patch on her chest. But most striking were her eyes, deep amber pools filled with an almost human-like intelligence and, strangely, concern. She sniffed at the door, her sensitive nose detecting the scent of the small human inside. Then, instead of continuing her night's journey, she settled down on the porch. Her large body blocked the entrance completely as she laid her head on massive paws and fixed her gaze on the door, as if waiting, as if standing guard. Inside, Noah heard the heavy thud on the porch and froze. His small heart raced wildly in his chest. "Mommy," he whispered again, hope briefly flaring. But the silence that followed told him it wasn't his mother. The night deepened around the small house. The bear did not move. She did not forage for food or return to her cubs in the forest. She simply waited, her breath fogging in the cool spring air, her eyes never leaving the door behind which a frightened child sat alone. Morning dawned cool and misty in Pine Hollow. Jacob Bennett, the village's only shopkeeper, was the first to notice the unusual sight as he made his early deliveries. "Good Lord above," he muttered, stopping his truck abruptly. A massive bear, one of the largest he'd ever seen, was lying on Savannah Marshall's front porch. Jacob reached for his phone with trembling fingers, unable to tear his eyes away from the beast. The bear seemed oddly calm, not aggressive or destructive as bears sometimes were when they wandered into the village. Instead, she appeared to be guarding the house. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered at a safe distance. Lily Morgan, the village's unofficial leader and schoolteacher, tried to make sense of the situation. "Has anyone seen Savannah?" she asked, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the bear. "She works nights at the hospital in Riverdale," offered Haley Dawson, who lived 2 houses down. "She should have been back hours ago." "And what about little Noah?" Lily pressed, concern etching deep lines around her eyes. The crowd murmured uneasily. The bear's ears twitched at their voices, but she made no move toward them. Instead, she shifted her position slightly, blocking the door more completely. Inside, Noah had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the living room floor. The sound of voices outside roused him, and he rubbed his eyes with small fists. Morning light filtered through the curtains, revealing a home still empty of his mother. Fresh tears welled in his eyes. He approached the window cautiously and peered out. What he saw made him gasp. People from the village standing in his yard, and something large and dark on his porch. Curiosity momentarily overcoming fear, he pressed his small face against the glass for a better look. The bear's reaction was immediate. She raised her massive head, ears perking up at the movement behind the window. A low sound rumbled from her throat, not threatening, but almost like a greeting. When Noah's teary face appeared in the window, the bear made a soft whining noise, her eyes fixed on the child. Outside, the villagers watched in astonishment. "Did you see that?" whispered Michael Hayes, the local forest ranger. She responded to the boy. "This isn't normal bear behavior," Lily said quietly. "Something's wrong." Michael nodded, his experienced eyes studying the animal. "She's not aggressive, she's protective." A small sob escaped Noah as he backed away from the window. The sound carried faintly through the glass, and the bear's reaction stunned everyone watching. She rose up slightly, making a low, mournful sound that echoed the child's distress. "Is anyone brave enough to check on the boy?" Jacob asked, looking around at the gathered faces. After a moment of tense silence, Michael stepped forward. "I've worked with wildlife for years. If anyone should approach, it's me." The crowd held its breath as Michael slowly, deliberately moved toward the house. The bear watched him warily, her massive body tensing as he approached. But she didn't charge or show signs of aggression. She simply watched, her intelligent eyes tracking his every move. Michael stopped a safe distance away and called out, "Noah? Noah, are you okay in there, buddy?" A small voice answered, after a pause. "I'm scared. My mommy didn't come home." The bear's ears twitched at the child's voice, and she made another soft whining sound. "Do you know where your mommy went?" Michael asked gently. "To work," came the quiet reply. "She said Mrs. Carter would come, but nobody came. I've been alone all night." The revelation sent a ripple of concern through the crowd. Haley gasped. "Oh no. Ellen Carter fell last night and was taken to the same hospital where Savannah works. She must not have been able to check on Noah as planned." Understanding dawned on the villagers' faces. The child had been alone all night, and somehow, against all explanation, the bear had known. She hadn't left the door, hadn't tried to break in or cause harm. She had simply stood guard over a vulnerable, lonely child. Lily pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the hospital in Riverdale. Something must have happened to Savannah." While she made the call, Michael continued to talk softly to Noah, instructing him to stay away from the doors and the windows. The bear remained motionless, her eyes moving between Michael and the house where Noah was. Lily's face paled as she ended her call. "Savannah was in a car accident last night on her way home from her shift. She's in intensive care. The hospital has been trying to reach a family contact." A hush fell over the crowd. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that defied rational explanation, but touched something deep and primal in each of them. "That bear has been here all night," Jacob said quietly, as if she knew the child was in danger of being alone. "But how could she possibly know?" someone whispered. Michael shook his head in wonder. "Animals sense things we don't. But this is extraordinary." Inside, Noah began to cry again, the sound of his distress carrying clearly to everyone outside. "I want my mommy," he sobbed, his voice breaking with fear and loneliness. The bear's reaction left everyone speechless. She rose to her full height, her massive form towering over the porch, and let out a sound that wasn't a roar, but almost a mournful cry, as if sharing in the child's grief. Then she gently lowered herself back down, her body still shielding the door. "We need to get to the boy," Lily said firmly. "Bear or no bear." The villagers looked at each other, uncertain how to proceed. The bear was not acting aggressively, but she was still a wild animal, powerful and unpredictable. Michael thought for a moment, then spoke. "I have an idea. This bear seems to understand that the child needs protection. Maybe she'll understand that we're here to help." He motioned for everyone to stay back, then slowly approached again, this time carrying a small lunchbox he had retrieved from his truck. "Noah," he called gently, "I'm going to bring you some food, okay? And then we're going to figure out how to get you to your mommy." "Is my mommy okay?" came the trembling reply. Michael hesitated, then answered honestly. "She's sick, buddy, but the doctors are taking good care of her." Noah's soft crying resumed, and the bear shifted restlessly on the porch, making soft grunting noises. Michael opened the lunchbox, revealing a sandwich and an apple. Moving with deliberate slowness, he approached the porch steps. The bear watched him, her dark eyes unblinking. Michael stopped at the bottom step, placed the lunchbox on the ground and backed away slowly. "I'm trying to help the child," he said softly to the bear, feeling somewhat foolish for speaking to a wild animal, but compelled by the strange intelligence in her gaze. To everyone's amazement, the bear shifted slightly to the side, creating a narrow path to the door while still maintaining her protective position. Michael stared in disbelief. "She's letting me approach," he whispered. Gathering his courage, he picked up the lunchbox and slowly climbed the steps. The bear watched him, muscles tense but making no move to attack. When he reached the door, he was close enough to feel the heat radiating from her massive body, to smell her wild, musky scent. He knocked gently. "Noah? Can you come to the door, buddy?" There was a shuffling sound, then the door opened a crack. A small, tear-stained face peered out. Noah's eyes widened at the sight of the bear so close, but strangely, he showed no fear. "She's been here all night," he said softly. "I saw her through the window. She didn't try to get in, she just stayed." Michael handed Noah the lunchbox, his heart breaking at the sight of the exhausted child. "We're going to take care of you now, okay? Your mommy had an accident, but she's going to be all right. We need to get you to her." Noah nodded, clutching his teddy bear in one hand and the lunchbox in the other. As Michael reached to take Noah's hand, the bear made a soft sound, almost like a sigh. She rose to her feet, towering over them both, and for a moment Michael's heart raced with fear. But the bear simply looked at Noah, her dark eyes meeting his, then slowly backed away from the porch steps. Noah looked up at the massive creature without fear. "Thank you for staying with me," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to thank a wild bear. The bear made another soft sound, then turned and began to walk toward the forest edge. But before disappearing into the trees, she looked back once more at the child, a long, knowing gaze that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. As Michael led Noah to Lily's waiting arms, the villagers stood in stunned silence. There was no rational explanation for what they had witnessed. A wild bear that had somehow sensed a child in need and stood guard through the night until help arrived. Later, as they drove Noah to the hospital to reunite with his recovering mother, Lily tried to make sense of what had happened. Maybe it was coincidence, she offered weakly. Michael shook his head, his eyes still wide with wonder. That wasn't coincidence. That was something else entirely. Noah, sitting quietly in the back seat with his teddy bear, spoke up. "The bear knew I was scared," he said simply. "She's a mommy, too." The adults exchanged glances, unable to dispute the child's simple wisdom. Something extraordinary had happened in their small village, something that defied explanation but spoke to a deeper truth about connection, protection, and the mysterious bonds that could form between the most unlikely of creatures. As they arrived at the hospital, a nurse met them with news that Savannah was awake and asking for her son. "She's been so worried," the nurse explained. "She kept saying she needed to get home to Noah." When Noah ran into his mother's arms, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. But amid the emotional reunion, Noah had a story to tell. Of a mother bear who had refused to leave his door, who had somehow known he was alone and afraid, and who had stayed until he was safe. "Do you think she'll come back?" Noah asked his mother as he curled up beside her hospital bed. Savannah stroked his hair, her own eyes filled with tears of gratitude for the mysterious guardian who had watched over her child when she could not. "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, "but I do know that mothers, all kinds of mothers, will do anything to protect a child." In the weeks that followed, the story of Noah and the guardian bear spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire. Each retelling added new details, some embellished, others thoughtfully pondered. The village, once merely a dot on the map known only for its annual apple festival, suddenly found itself the center of attention as news outlets from neighboring towns began to inquire about the miracle bear of Pine Hollow. Savannah's recovery was slow but steady. The car accident had left her with a broken leg, 3 fractured ribs, and a concussion that initially blurred her memories of that night. When she first heard the story of the bear who had kept vigil over her son, she had smiled weakly, assuming it was a kind fiction created to comfort Noah. But as more villagers came to visit, each sharing the same account with awestruck voices, the truth became undeniable. "I've never believed in anything spiritual," Savannah confessed to Lily one afternoon as they sat on the porch of the Marshall home, now repaired and freshly painted after the community had rallied to help the single mother. "But what else could explain it? That bear knew my son needed protection." Lily nodded, her eyes drifting to where Noah played in the yard, his movements more carefree than they had been since that fateful night. "Some things defy explanation," she said softly, "but that doesn't make them any less real." Noah had developed a fascination with bears following his experience. His bedroom walls, once decorated with dinosaur posters, now featured bears of every species. He drew pictures of his bear at school, and his teacher, Mrs. Dawson, had been so moved by his story that she had developed an entire curriculum around wildlife conservation for her class. "Do you think she had babies?" Noah asked his mother one evening as she tucked him into bed. Savannah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I think she probably did," she said. "Michael says most female bears in this region have cubs in the spring." Noah's eyes widened with wonder. "So, she left her babies to watch over me?" The thought caught in Savannah's throat, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered. "Or maybe she brought them with her, and they waited in the forest while she watched over you." This possibility became Noah's favorite bedtime story. Imagining the bear cubs waiting patiently for their mother to return from her mission of protection. Savannah would elaborate on this tale each night, describing how the mother bear might have explained to her cubs the importance of watching over those in need, regardless of species or differences. As spring deepened into summer, The villagers occasionally spotted a large black bear with a distinctive white chest patch at the forest edge, sometimes accompanied by 2 small cubs. She never again approached the human dwellings directly, maintaining the respectful distance that had always existed between the woodland creatures and the village. But the people of Pine Hollow began leaving offerings of fruit and honey at the forest boundary, small tokens of gratitude for the mother bear who had reminded them all of the powerful, unexplainable bonds of protection and love that transcended species. Michael Hayes, inspired by the event, started a wildlife education program in the village, where once the community had viewed the forest creatures with fear or indifference, they now developed a deeper appreciation for their wild neighbors. Warning systems were established to alert residents when bears were spotted near homes, not to create panic but to ensure both humans and animals remained safe in their shared environment. The bear could have easily broken into your home that night, Michael explained to Noah during one of his educational sessions at the school. Bears are incredibly strong, but she chose to stand guard instead. She somehow knew you needed protection, not fear. Noah nodded solemnly. She talked to me through the window, he said, a statement that would have been dismissed as childish imagination before, but now gave the adults pause. Not with words, but I knew what she was saying. She told me not to be afraid, that someone would come for me soon. 3 months after the incident, a wildlife photographer from National Geographic arrived in Pine Hollow, drawn by the increasingly widespread accounts of the guardian bear. Connor Adams was skeptical at first, his 20 years of documenting animal behavior having taught him that most miraculous animal stories had perfectly rational explanations when examined closely. Bears don't behave altruistically toward other species, he explained to the group gathered at the village's only cafe. It goes against everything we understand about their behavior patterns. Then how do you explain what happened? Challenged Jacob Bennett, who had witnessed the bear's behavior firsthand. Connor shrugged. Perhaps the bear was ill or disoriented. Maybe she had lost her cubs and was displaying misplaced maternal instincts. The suggestion that the bear might have lost her cubs cast a pall over the gathering. The thought was too painful to contemplate, especially for Noah, who had accompanied his mother to the meeting. She wasn't sad, Noah piped up, his small voice cutting through the adult conversation. She was worried, for me, not herself. Connor looked at the boy with kind eyes. And how do you know that, young man? Noah met his gaze without hesitation. Because I could feel it. The same way I can feel when my mom is worried about me even when she doesn't say anything. The simplicity and certainty of the child's response left Connor momentarily speechless. He had come seeking a rational explanation, but found himself facing something that transcended conventional understanding. Over the next 2 weeks, Connor set up cameras at the edge of the forest, hoping to capture images of the now famous bear. His patience was rewarded when, on the 10th day, his equipment recorded a large female black bear with a distinctive white chest patch emerging cautiously from the tree line at dawn. Behind her trailed 2 cubs, tumbling and playing in the early morning light. She didn't lose her cubs, Noah said triumphantly when Connor shared the footage with the village. She was teaching them about helping others. The photographs Connor captured became part of a feature article that brought international attention to Pine Hollow. Guardians of the Forest, the unexplainable bond between species, ran in magazines and newspapers worldwide, accompanied by Connor's stunning images of the mother bear and her growing cubs. As autumn painted the forest in brilliant hues of red and gold, Pine Hollow hosted its first Guardian Festival, celebrating not just the miracle that had occurred in 1850, their small community, but the broader message it had inspired. that compassion could transcend the boundaries humans so often erected between themselves and the natural world. Savannah, now fully recovered from her accident, stood on the edge of the festival grounds, watching as Noah participated in a children's play that reenacted the night of the bear's vigil. Her heart swelled with a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for the mysterious intervention that had kept her son safe, wonder at the unexplainable connection that had formed between Noah and the wild creature, and a deeper appreciation for the community that had rallied around them in their time of need. "They're saying there have been other incidents," Michael said quietly, joining her at the perimeter of the celebration. "Not just here, but in other places where bears and humans coexist. Stories that were dismissed as tall tales or coincidences, but after what happened with Noah." Savannah nodded, understanding the implication. Perhaps the barrier between human and animal consciousness wasn't as impenetrable as science had always assumed. Perhaps in moments of genuine need, that barrier could be bridged by something more powerful than language or rationality, something as primal and universal as the instinct to protect. As the festival concluded and the villagers returned to their homes under a canopy of stars, Noah tugged at his mother's hand, pointing toward the dark line of trees at the forest's edge. "Look, Mom," he whispered. There, just visible in the silver moonlight, stood a large shadow, motionless, watchful. Beside it, two smaller shadows moved playfully. Savannah felt tears spring to her eyes as she knelt beside her son. "Do you think she remembers you?" she asked softly. Noah smiled, a wisdom beyond his years shining in his eyes. "She remembers all of us," he said simply. "And now we remember her, too." The bear remained at the forest's edge for several long moments, her silhouette a dark sentinel against the night sky. Then, with a gentle motion that seemed almost like a bow, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her cubs following close behind. The following spring, the village established the Pine Hollow Wildlife Preserve, protecting hundreds of acres of forest from development and creating educational programs that brought schoolchildren from across the state to learn about coexistence with nature. A bronze statue of a mother bear, standing protectively at the preserve's entrance, became a pilgrimage site for visitors who had been touched by the story, many leaving small tokens of appreciation: jars of honey, bundles of wildflowers, handwritten notes of gratitude. Noah, now 6 years old and bursting with newfound confidence, often served as an unofficial guide for these visitors, retelling his experience with the solemn certainty of one who had glimpsed a truth most adults spent their lives seeking. "The most important thing," he would explain, his small hand gesturing toward the forest, "is to remember that we're not separate from them. We're all connected, even when we can't see how." Scientists continued to debate the incident, offering various theories to explain the bear's unusual behavior, from neurological anomalies to complex territorial motivations. But for the people of Pine Hollow, and for the thousands who made the journey to their small village in search of something that science couldn't fully explain, the message remained beautifully simple: that in moments of greatest vulnerability, help can come from the most unexpected sources, and that the instinct to protect the innocent knows no boundaries, not even those between human and wild. And sometimes, in the quiet dawn hours when the village still slept, a mother and her son would walk to the edge of the forest, leaving small offerings of honey and fruit. Though they rarely saw the bears directly anymore, they would occasionally find tracks in the soft earth, large paw prints accompanied by smaller ones, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that defied explanation but remained as real as the rising sun. "Do you think there are other animals who help humans?" Noah asked his mother during one such morning visit. Savannah looked out at the vast expanse of forest, thinking of all the stories that had emerged since their experience. tales from around the world of unexpected interventions by creatures who, by all rational understanding, should have no reason to care for human welfare. I think, she said carefully, that we've spent so long believing we're separate from nature that we've forgotten how to see the connections that were always there. Noah nodded, satisfied with this answer. He placed his small offering, a jar of honey from Jacob Bennett's new beehives, on the flat rock that had become their unofficial meeting point with the forest and its inhabitants. "Thank you," he whispered to the silent trees. "Not just for me, but for reminding everyone." As they turned to walk back to the village, a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, nature's quiet response to a gratitude that needed no words, a connection that required no explanation, and a miracle that had forever changed a small village's understanding of what it meant to coexist with the wild world just beyond their doorsteps. 2 years passed, and Pine Hollow transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The small village that had once been struggling economically now thrived as an eco-tourism destination. The Pine Hollow Wildlife Preserve expanded to include a research center where scientists and naturalists studied the unique ecological balance of the region. What had begun as a mysterious encounter between a child and a bear had evolved into a movement that brought new life to the community. Noah, now 7.5, had grown 2 inches taller and exponentially in confidence. No longer the timid child who had once huddled alone in a dark house, he had become a passionate advocate for wildlife conservation. His bedroom bookshelf overflowed with volumes about bears, wolves, and other forest creatures, many of them gifts from visitors who had been touched by his story. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled around the village square, a sleek black car with government license plates pulled up in front of the newly established Pine Hollow Community Center. A woman in a tailored suit emerged, her expression a mixture of curiosity and professional detachment. "That's Dr. Eliza Thornton," Michael whispered to Savannah as they watched from the porch of the small cafe that had become the village's unofficial meeting place. "She's from the Department of Wildlife Conservation. I've been corresponding with her about our preserve, but I didn't expect her to come in person." Savannah felt a flutter of anxiety. Since the incident, Pine Hollow had operated its wildlife initiatives with passionate amateur enthusiasm rather than strict scientific oversight. Would this official visit bring unwelcome scrutiny? Dr. Thornton approached them with a confident stride. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Dr. Thornton. I hope you don't mind my unannounced visit. I was intrigued by your reports and decided to see this place for myself." Michael shook her hand warmly. "Not at all. We're always happy to share what we've learned." He introduced Savannah, whose reputation as the mother in the bear story had spread far beyond the village boundaries. Dr. Thornton's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Mrs. Marshall, it's an honor to meet you. Your son's experience has generated significant interest in the scientific community, though I must admit many of my colleagues remain skeptical." Savannah nodded, unsurprised. "We don't blame them. If I hadn't experienced it through my son, I might be skeptical too." "May I meet Noah?" Dr. Thornton asked. "I understand he's become quite the junior naturalist." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Noah appeared around the corner of the building, accompanied by 2 other children from the village. His cheeks were flushed from play, his dark hair tousled by the autumn wind. When Savannah introduced him to Dr. Thornton, he extended his hand with the solemn dignity of a child who had grown accustomed to sharing his story with strangers. "You're the bear expert, aren't you?" he asked, surprising Dr. Thornton with his directness. "Michael told me you were coming to study our bears." Dr. Thornton smiled, crouching to meet his eye level. "I study all kinds of wildlife interactions, but yes, bears are my specialty. I've heard you know quite a bit about them yourself. Noah's eyes lit up. I have 17 books about bears now, and I've been keeping a journal about the ones in our forest. He hesitated, then added with the transparent honesty of childhood, I haven't seen my bear up close since that night, but sometimes I see her watching from the trees when Mom and I go to leave our offerings. Dr. Thornton's scientific interest visibly piqued. You believe you can identify the specific bear from a distance? Noah nodded with absolute certainty. She has a white patch on her chest shaped like a crescent moon, and her eyes are different from other bears. Different how? Dr. Thornton asked, maintaining a neutral tone despite her evident fascination. Noah considered this, searching for words to express what he felt rather than merely saw. They're more awake, he finally said, like she sees things other bears don't see. The adults exchanged glances over his head, but Dr. Thornton made no attempt to correct or dismiss his observation. Instead, she asked, Would you show me where you leave your offerings? I'd like to set up some cameras there, with your permission. This question was directed at Savannah, who hesitated. The offering spot had become a sacred place for them, a private connection to the mysterious force that had protected her son. Opening it to scientific scrutiny felt like a violation of something precious. Michael sensed her reluctance. The cameras would be non-invasive, he explained. They might help us better understand the bear's behavior patterns and protect them more effectively. After a moment's consideration, Savannah nodded. If it helps the bears, then yes. That afternoon, Savannah, Noah, Michael, and Dr. Thornton walked the familiar path to the forest's edge. Noah skipped ahead, occasionally stopping to point out various plants and animal tracks with the expertise of a child who had made nature his study. He's remarkable, Dr. Thornton commented quietly to Savannah. Most children his age who've had encounters with large predators develop phobias, not fascination. Savannah watched her son with a mixture of pride and wonder. The bear never frightened him. Even that night he said he felt safe knowing she was outside. They reached the clearing where the flat rock stood, adorned with the previous day's offering, a small basket of apples and a jar of golden honey. Dr. Thornton examined the area with professional interest, noting the numerous animal tracks in the soft earth around the rock. Multiple species come here, she observed, pointing to the distinctive prints of raccoons, foxes, and deer alongside the larger bear tracks. It's become a neutral ground of sorts. While Dr. Thornton set up her cameras with Michael's assistance, Noah led his mother a short distance away, tugging her hand with unusual urgency. "Mom," he whispered, pointing to a dense thicket of undergrowth at the forest's edge. "Look." Savannah squinted into the dappled shadows, seeing nothing at first. Then a subtle movement caught her eye. A dark shape shifting almost imperceptibly behind the screen of leaves. Two amber eyes gleamed briefly in the filtered sunlight, intelligent and watchful. Savannah's breath caught in her throat. The bear was larger than she remembered, her presence commanding even in stillness. Beside her, partially hidden by her massive form, two adolescent cubs observed the humans with curious eyes. "It's her," Noah whispered, his voice trembling with excitement rather than fear. "She came to see us." The bear made no sound, no movement to indicate acknowledgement. And yet, Savannah felt with absolute certainty that Noah was right. This was not a random appearance. The bear had chosen this moment to reveal herself, perhaps sensing the new presence in their ritual, perhaps simply responding to some unspoken connection to the child whose life she had guarded. Fighting the instinctive urge to pull her son away from potential danger, Savannah remained still, trusting in the strange bond that had formed 2 years ago. Noah raised his small hand in a gesture that was half wave, half benediction. "Hello," he said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed clearing. "Thank you for coming to see us." The bear's ears twitched, her gaze never leaving the boy. Then, with a gentle huffing sound, she nudged her cubs deeper into the forest and followed them, her massive form disappearing into the shadows with surprising grace. Dr. Thornton and Michael had seen the entire exchange from a distance, the scientist frozen in mid-motion as she adjusted her camera. "Was that?" she began, her professional detachment momentarily shattered. "Yes," Savannah said simply. "That was our bear." The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity to Pine Hollow. Dr. Thornton's cameras captured remarkable footage, not just of the mother bear and her growing cubs visiting the offering site, but of an entire ecosystem that had developed around this small clearing, where human and animal worlds intersected. The scientific papers she published brought a new kind of attention to the village, less sensational than the initial media storm but more enduring in its impact. "We're observing what appears to be learned behavior transmitted across species boundaries," Dr. Thornton explained during a community presentation at the newly established research center. "The bears have developed a routine of approaching human-adjacent areas in specific, non-threatening ways, and other animals are adopting similar patterns." What had begun as a miraculous but isolated incident had evolved into something even more extraordinary, a documented case of changed relationships between humans and wildlife, initiated by one bear's inexplicable decision to guard a vulnerable child. As winter approached, bringing the first dusting of snow to Pine Hollow, Savannah received an unexpected call from Dr. Thornton. "We've been tracking your bear family," the scientist said, her voice tight with an emotion Savannah couldn't immediately identify. "The mother appears to be ill. We've observed her struggling to forage, and the cubs are showing signs of distress." Savannah felt her heart constrict. "What does that mean? What can we do?" Dr. Thornton hesitated. "Normally, our protocol is non-interference with wildlife unless human activity has caused the problem. But given the unique circumstances in Pine Hollow, I've consulted with my department. We're sending a veterinary team to assess her condition, with the possibility of intervention if necessary." The news spread quickly through the village. By nightfall, a small group had gathered at Savannah's home. Michael, Lily, Jacob, and several others who had witnessed the original incident. "What do you think is wrong with her?" Lily asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Michael shook his head grimly. "It could be anything. Disease, injury, toxin exposure. Bears face countless threats, especially as they age." "She's not that old," Noah protested from the staircase, where he sat in his pajamas, having refused to go to bed despite Savannah's gentle insistence. "And she's strong. I saw her." Savannah sat beside her son, putting her arm around his thin shoulders. "Dr. Thornton has the best experts coming to help her," she assured him, though her own fear threaded through her words. Noah looked up at her with eyes that held both childish vulnerability and startling wisdom. "She helped me when I needed it," he said quietly. "Now, she needs help." The adults exchanged glances, recognizing the simple truth in the child's words. Whatever scientific explanations might be offered for the bear's behavior that night 2 years ago, the result had been the protection of a vulnerable child. Now, that same bear was vulnerable, and the debt of gratitude remained unpaid. The following morning, Dr. Thornton's team arrived. 2 wildlife veterinarians and a bear behavior specialist, equipped with tranquilizer guns and medical supplies. A small crowd of villagers accompanied them to the edge of the preserve, maintaining a respectful distance as the professionals prepared for their delicate mission. Noah insisted on coming, clinging to Savannah's hand with unusual determination. "She'll be scared," he explained when Michael suggested he might wait at home. "She should see someone she knows." Dr. Thornton knelt before him, her expression serious. "Noah, this is potentially dangerous work. The mother might be aggressive if she feels her cubs are threatened, especially if she's ill." Noah met her gaze steadily. "She won't hurt me," he said, with the unshakable confidence of a child who had experienced something beyond adult understanding. After a lengthy discussion, a compromise was reached. Noah and Savannah would accompany the team but remain at a safe distance, visible but out of harm's way. The tracking equipment led them deeper into the forest than Savannah and Noah had ever ventured before. The boy showed no fear as the familiar trails gave way to dense, uncharted woodland, his eyes scanning the trees with eager anticipation rather than apprehension. "The signal's strong," one of the technicians announced, checking the handheld receiver that monitored the tracking collar Dr. Thornton's team had placed on the bear weeks earlier. "She's just ahead, not moving much." The team advanced cautiously with Noah and Savannah hanging back as agreed. Then, in a small clearing beside a half-frozen stream, they found her. The massive bear lying on her side, her breathing labored, her once glossy coat dull and matted. The cubs paced nearby, occasionally nudging their mother with confused whimpers. The veterinarians assessed the situation with quick, professional glances. "Probable poisoning," one murmured to Dr. Thornton. "Could be rodenticide or something she scavenged from human waste." The team prepared their equipment with efficient movements, discussing a treatment plan in low voices. The tranquilizer gun was readied, a necessary precaution even with a weakened bear. Noah, watching from the designated safe distance, suddenly broke free from his mother's grip. Before anyone could stop him, he darted forward, crossing the open space between the humans and the suffering bear with swift, determined steps. "Noah!" Savannah's scream tore through the forest silence. She lunged after him, but Michael caught her arm, holding her back with gentle firmness. "Wait," he said urgently. "Look." Noah had stopped a few feet from the bear, his small frame tense but unafraid. The cubs retreated slightly, confused by his presence but not aggressive. The mother bear's eyes opened, those intelligent amber eyes that had watched over a frightened child 2 years ago, focusing with effort on the boy who stood before her now. "It's okay," Noah said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed clearing. "These people are here to help you, like you helped me. You don't need to be afraid." The bear made a low sound, neither threatening nor fearful, a sound of recognition, of acknowledgement. She did not attempt to rise or show any aggression as Noah sank to his knees in the snow beside her massive head. "Please," he said, turning to the frozen veterinary team. "Help her now." It was as if a spell had been broken. The professionals moved forward cautiously, led by Dr. Thornton, whose scientific skepticism had finally yielded to the evidence before her eyes. The bear remained calm as they approached, her gaze never leaving the boy who had placed his small hand on her rough fur. "I'll stay right here," Noah promised, as the veterinarians began their work, administering medications and fluids to counteract the suspected poisoning. "Just like you stayed with me." Savannah watched from the edge of the clearing, tears streaming down her face. Tears of fear for her son, yes, but also tears of wonder at witnessing the continuation of a connection that defied all rational explanation. The treatment lasted hours, the winter sun arcing across the sky as the veterinary team fought to save the bear's life. Noah remained beside her throughout, speaking softly to her when she grew restless, his presence seemingly calming her in a way that even the tranquilizers could not fully achieve. As twilight descended on the forest, Dr. Thornton approached Savannah, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes alight with cautious hope. "She's stabilizing," she said quietly. "We've counteracted most of the toxins, but she'll need ongoing treatment. We're setting up a temporary field hospital here rather than trying to move her." Savannah nodded, her gaze fixed on her son, who had fallen asleep against the bear's massive side. One of the cubs curled surprisingly close to him. The tableau before her was simultaneously terrifying and beautiful, a visual representation of the extraordinary bond that had formed between her child and this wild creature. "He can't stay out here all night," she said, though she already knew Noah would protest being separated from the bear. Dr. Thornton followed her gaze. "We'll set up a proper observation tent. You can both stay if you wish. She hesitated, then admitted with a small smile, "I find myself reluctant to disturb whatever is happening here. From a scientific perspective, it's unprecedented." That night, Savannah and Noah remained in the forest, sheltered in the observation tent while the veterinary team maintained their vigil over the bear. Noah had been reluctant to leave her side, but had finally agreed to rest when Dr. Thornton explained that the bear needed quiet to heal. "Will she get better?" he asked sleepily as Savannah tucked the thermal blankets around him. "The doctors are doing everything they can," she answered honestly. "They say she's very strong." Noah nodded, his eyes already closing. "She is, and she knows we're helping her." He drifted into sleep with the absolute confidence of a child who believed in miracles because he had experienced one firsthand. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. The temporary camp evolved into a more permanent setup as the bear's condition gradually improved. News of the operation spread, drawing media attention once again to Pine Hollow. But this time, the village was prepared. Jacob Bennett organized a community response team that managed the influx of journalists and curious visitors, ensuring they remained at a respectful distance from the recovery site. On the 4th day, as morning sunlight filtered through the bare branches overhead, the bear rose to her feet for the first time since falling ill. Her movements were still unsteady, but her eyes were clear and alert. The cubs, who had remained nearby under the watchful eyes of the wildlife team, approached their mother with visible relief, nuzzling against her with soft whimpers. Noah, who had divided his time between school and the forest camp, arrived just in time to witness this moment. His face lit up with joy as he watched the bear family's reunion from the observation point. "She's going to be okay," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of absolute certainty. Dr. Thornton nodded, her scientific reserve softened by days of witnessing the extraordinary relationship between this child and the wild animal who had once protected him. "Yes, I believe she is," she confirmed, "and it's largely thanks to you, Noah. Your presence kept her calm enough for us to treat her effectively." Noah shook his head. "Not just me. Everyone helped. That's what she showed us, that we should help each other, even if we're different." As spring returned to Pine Hollow, bringing new green life to the forest, the story of the guardian bear took on another chapter. Dr. Thornton's research team, which had remained to monitor the bear's recovery, documented a remarkable development: the formation of what they cautiously termed an interspecies social network centered around the clearing where offerings had been left for years. "We're observing multiple bear families using the same territory without the usual territorial conflicts," Dr. Thornton explained during a presentation at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference that had, to everyone's surprise, chosen Pine Hollow as its location. Furthermore, the behavior patterns we've recorded suggest intentional avoidance of human-wildlife conflict. The bears are teaching their cubs specific routes that minimize encounters with humans while allowing them to access food sources near the village. The scientific community remained divided on how to interpret these observations. Some researchers argued for purely evolutionary explanations, adaptive behaviors selected for survival advantage. Others, particularly those who had spent time in Pine Hollow and witnessed the interactions firsthand, cautiously proposed more revolutionary theories about animal cognition and interspecies communication. For the people of Pine Hollow, especially for Savannah and Noah, scientific explanations mattered less than the lived reality of their experience. The village had been transformed not just economically but spiritually by its encounter with the wild. The invisible barrier that humans had constructed between themselves and nature had been breached, revealing a deeper truth about interconnection that no amount of rational analysis could fully explain or dismiss. On Noah's 8th birthday, as summer bloomed in full glory around Pine Hollow, Savannah took him on a special trip, not to the forest's edge where they usually left their offerings, but to the heart of the newly established coexistence zone, a carefully designated area where humans could observe wildlife from specially constructed blinds without disturbing the animals' natural behaviors. As they settled into the observation blind, Noah vibrating with contained excitement, Savannah handed him a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Happy birthday," she said softly. Noah unwrapped it carefully, revealing a handcrafted journal bound in soft leather, with his name embossed on the cover in gold letters. "Your grandfather's journal," Savannah explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a naturalist, too, though I'd almost forgotten until all this happened. I think he would have loved to see the work you're doing." Noah ran his fingers reverently over the blank pages, already imagining the observations and drawings he would fill them with. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. As if on cue, movement in the clearing beyond the blind caught their attention. The mother bear, now fully recovered and even more magnificent than before, emerged from the tree line, her cubs, nearly grown now, following behind her. She paused, lifting her head to scent the air, then looked directly toward the blind where Savannah and Noah sat watching. There was no way she could see them through the carefully designed one-way viewing panel, and yet both mother and son felt with absolute certainty that she knew exactly where they were. The bear settled comfortably on a fallen log, watching as her cubs explored the clearing. Her posture relaxed, but alert, the eternal vigilance of a mother protecting her young. Noah opened his new journal, his pencil poised above the first blank page. After a moment's thought, he began to write, his young hand careful and deliberate. Some people think animals can't understand us, and maybe they're right about the words. But today, on my 8th birthday, I'm watching the bear who saved my life when I was little. She doesn't need words to show that she remembers, and that she still cares. Maybe that's the biggest lesson she taught us all, that being different doesn't mean we can't understand each other in the ways that matter most. Savannah read over his shoulder, tears filling her eyes at the simple wisdom in her son's words. She put her arm around him, drawing him close as they continued to watch the bear family in comfortable silence. Two species, once separated by fear and misunderstanding, now connected by an unexplainable bond of mutual protection and respect. In the years that followed, Pine Hollow would become known worldwide as a model for human-wildlife coexistence. The research center would expand, drawing scientists and conservationists from across the globe. Educational programs based on the village's experience would spread to other communities facing the challenges of living alongside wild predators. But at the heart of it all remained the simple story of a child alone in the dark, and the wild creature who had, for reasons science might never fully explain, chosen to stand guard through the night until help arrived. a story of connection across boundaries that most had considered impenetrable. A story that reminded all who heard it that compassion, protection, and care could transcend the barriers humans constructed between themselves and the natural world. And in that reminder lay a hope for healing, not just for Pine Hollow, but for a planet increasingly in need of stories that bridged the divide between human and wild. 5 years passed, and Pine Hollow flourished in ways no one could have predicted. The village that had once been barely visible on maps had become an international landmark, drawing visitors from across the globe who came seeking something more than a typical wilderness experience. They came for the story, for the promise that here, in this small corner of the world, a different kind of relationship with nature had been forged. Noah Marshall, now 13, had grown into a thoughtful young man whose childhood encounter had shaped his entire worldview. His room was filled with science awards, nature journals, and college brochures, most of them highlighting programs in wildlife biology and conservation. Though still years from graduation, Noah already knew his life's calling with a certainty that most adults never achieved. Savannah watched her son's evolution with quiet pride. The frightened child who had huddled alone in a dark house had become a confident, compassionate young man who moved through the world with an unusual awareness of his connection to all living things. His childhood trauma had transformed into purpose, guided by the inexplicable intervention of a wild creature who had, against all logic, chosen to protect him. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled around the village square, Savannah found Noah at the kitchen table, poring over a letter with an expression of stunned disbelief. "What is it?" she asked, setting a mug of hot chocolate beside him, a childhood comfort he had never outgrown. Noah looked up, his eyes wide. "It's from National Geographic," he said, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent excitement. "They want to feature my photography in their special youth edition on wildlife conservation." Savannah beamed with pride, sitting across from him. "Noah, that's wonderful. Which photos did they select?" "The series I took of the bears at Twilight Ridge," he explained, referring to a remote area of the preserve where he had spent countless hours in patient observation. "They said my images capture a unique perspective on ursine social dynamics rarely documented in wildlife photography." His photography hobby had begun 3 years earlier, when Dr. Thornton had gifted him with a professional-grade camera for his 10th birthday. What had started as casual snapshots had evolved into a serious artistic and scientific pursuit, with Noah developing a remarkable talent for capturing moments of animal behavior that more seasoned photographers often missed. "We should celebrate," Savannah said warmly. "Maybe dinner at the forest table tonight?" Noah nodded absently, still reading through the letter. "Oh, and they want me to write a short essay to accompany the photos, about my personal connection to wildlife conservation." His expression grew contemplative, and Savannah knew he was thinking about how much to share of his extraordinary story. Over the years, as scientific interest in Pine Hollow's unique human-wildlife dynamics had grown, Noah had become increasingly selective about how he spoke of that night, not out of shame or disbelief, but from a desire to protect something he considered sacred from becoming merely a curiosity or, worse, a spectacle. "You don't have to tell the whole story," Savannah said gently, understanding his hesitation. "Just the parts that feel right to share." Noah nodded gratefully. "I know. I just want to make sure people understand it wasn't just some random thing. It wasn't a bear acting weird or confused. It was—" He searched for words to express the certainty he had carried since that night. "A choice. She chose to help me. And I want people to understand what that might mean about how we think about animals." Savannah reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I think you'll find the right words," she said. "You always do." Later that day, Noah headed to his favorite spot in the preserve, a small ridge overlooking the valley where several bear families now made their seasonal rounds. The observation blind built there had become his second home, a place where he spent hours documenting the complex social interactions of the bear community that had developed in the protected area. As he settled into the familiar space, arranging his camera and notebooks, his mind drifted back to the essay he needed to write. How could he convey the profound impact of that night without sounding fanciful or naive? How could he honor the truth of his experience while addressing the inevitable skepticism of those who hadn't witnessed it firsthand? A movement in the valley below caught his attention. A large female bear, not his bear, but one of her frequent companions, emerged from the tree line with two small cubs. Noah watched through his camera lens as the mother bear guided her young ones toward a shallow stream, demonstrating how to overturn rocks in search of crayfish. The comfortable familiarity of the scene soothed him. In the 8 years since the incident, the bear population in the preserve had thrived, developing behaviors that continued to challenge conventional understanding of ursine social structures. Dr. Thornton's research team had documented multiple generations of bears using the same adaptive techniques to coexist peacefully near human settlements, techniques that appeared to be taught rather than instinctive. "They're learning," Noah murmured to himself as he captured a series of images showing the mother bear correcting her cub's technique with gentle guidance. "And they're teaching." The sun was beginning to set when Noah heard footsteps approaching the blind. He recognized the deliberate gait of Dr. Thornton, who had become both mentor and friend over the years. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said, settling onto the bench beside him. National Geographic is quite an achievement for a photographer of any age. Noah smiled, his eyes still focused on the bear family below. "I still can't believe they chose my photos." Dr. Thornton watched him with the affectionate assessment of someone who had witnessed his growth for years. "I can. You see things others miss, Noah. You always have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, observing as the bear family completed their fishing lesson and moved back toward the shelter of the forest. "I've been thinking about the first bear," Noah said finally. "The one who stayed with me that night. We haven't seen her in almost a year." Dr. Thornton nodded, her expression softening with understanding. The distinctive bear with the white chest patch had been a regular presence in the preserve for years after her recovery, often appearing near the observation areas when Noah was present, as if maintaining their unusual connection. But recent months had brought no sightings, leading to quiet concern among those who had followed her story. "She would be quite old now," Dr. Thornton said gently. "Black bears in the wild typically live 15 to 20 years. Given her size and general health, she was likely a mature adult even 8 years ago." Noah nodded, accepting this reality with the quiet grace that often surprised adults who knew him. "I've been thinking about her life before she found me, about what might have made her different from other bears." "Different how?" Dr. Thornton asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. Noah considered this, his young face serious in the fading light. "Most animals are focused on survival, food, territory, protecting their young, but she recognized something beyond her immediate needs. She saw a situation that had nothing to do with her survival and chose to intervene." He paused. "That requires something more than instinct." Dr. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "The scientific community has been reconsidering animal cognition for decades now. The more we study, the more we find evidence of emotional complexity, problem-solving, and social awareness that were once considered uniquely human traits. But what she did goes beyond even that, Noah pressed. It wasn't just emotional intelligence or social behavior within her species. It was— he searched for the right words. It was moral. It was seeing vulnerability and choosing protection over indifference. The scientist didn't immediately dismiss this observation, as she might have in her earlier career. Years of studying the unique dynamics in Pine Hollow had softened her academic objectivity, opening her to possibilities that her training had once taught her to reject. "You know," she said after a thoughtful pause, "there's a theory gaining traction in some conservation circles. They call it conscious coevolution, the idea that as species inhabit shared environments over time, they don't just adapt physically to each other's presence, but socially and behaviorally as well. Humans have shaped animal behavior through our actions for millennia, mostly in ways that create fear and avoidance. But what if, in some circumstances, that influence could create different outcomes? What if, in some places, under some conditions, a different kind of relationship becomes possible?" Noah absorbed this, his expression brightening. That's it exactly. Something different happened here, and not just with her, but with all the bears that came after. They're still wild. They're not pets or trained animals, but they're relating to humans in a new way. Dr. Thornton smiled at his enthusiasm. "Which is why your perspective is so valuable, Noah. You've grown up witnessing this evolution firsthand. The essay you write could help shape how a new generation thinks about conservation, not just as preserving species, but as reimagining our relationship with them." Inspired by this conversation, Noah spent the next week crafting his essay, pouring his unique experiences and perspectives into a piece that balanced personal narrative with thoughtful reflection on broader implications. When he finally submitted it, along with his photographs, he felt a sense of completion, as if he had honored both the extraordinary bond that had shaped his life and the scientific inquiry that had grown from it. A month later, as winter settled over Pine Hollow, bringing the first heavy snowfall of the season, Noah received an unexpected visitor at the Marshall home. Connor Adams, the wildlife photographer who had first documented the mother bear and her cubs years ago, arrived unannounced on their doorstep, his weathered face grave. "I thought you should hear this from someone who understands what she meant to you," he said after Savannah had welcomed him in from the cold. "I've been tracking bear populations in the northern range, and I found something I believe belongs to your story." From his pack, Connor produced a small flash drive. "There's footage here I captured 2 weeks ago. I reviewed it carefully before coming to you." With growing apprehension, Noah and Savannah sat before the living room computer as Connor inserted the drive and opened a video file. The footage showed a remote, snow-covered clearing deep in the mountain range north of Pine Hollow, terrain rarely visited by humans, especially in winter. The timestamp indicated early morning, the forest still shrouded in pre-dawn shadows. Into the frame walked a large black bear with a distinctive white chest patch. Older, her movement stiffer than Noah remembered, but unmistakably the bear who had changed their lives. She moved with deliberate purpose to the center of the clearing, where she lowered herself to the ground with evident difficulty. "She's sick," Noah whispered, his throat tightening with emotion. Connor nodded grimly. "Terminal, from what our wildlife veterinarians can determine. She likely sought out an isolated location, as many wild animals do when they sense the end approaching." The footage continued, showing the bear arranging herself in the clearing, her movements growing increasingly labored. Then, in a moment that caught Noah's breath, she raised her head and looked directly at the camera, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to peer through the lens with unmistakable awareness. That camera was hidden and camouflaged, Connor said quietly. There's no way she should have known it was there. And yet... The bear maintained her gaze for a long moment, as if ensuring her message was received. Then she lowered her massive head to her paws and closed her eyes. The footage continued for several minutes, the only movement the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, growing steadily weaker. Connor stopped the video before its inevitable conclusion. The rest is private, he said simply. But I thought you should know. She died as she lived, with dignity and on her own terms. Noah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face. Savannah wrapped an arm around his shoulders, her own eyes brimming. "Thank you for bringing this to us," she said to Connor. "It means more than you know." After Connor left, promising to return in the spring to help Noah document the new generation of bears growing up in the preserve, Noah retreated to his room. Savannah gave him space, understanding that some grief needed solitude to be properly felt. Later that evening, she found him sitting on his bed, surrounded by journals filled with years of observations, sketches, and reflections on the bear who had been his guardian and inspiration. "She knew, Mom," he said as Savannah sat beside him. "All those years ago, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she kept watching over us, in her way, until she was sure we'd be okay without her." Savannah nodded, unable to dismiss the truth she felt in his words, despite all rational objection. "I believe she did," she said softly. "I want to do something," Noah said, wiping away tears with determined fingers. "Something to honor her. Not just a memorial or a plaque, but something that continues what she started." "What do you have in mind?" Savannah asked. Noah's eyes lit with purpose through his grief. "A foundation, the Guardian Initiative, for research and education about coexistence between humans and wildlife, but also for emergency response when children are in danger, bringing together people who know about search and rescue, wildlife tracking, everything that might have helped me that night if she hadn't been there." Savannah felt her heart swell with pride at her son's resilience, his ability to transform grief into purpose, just as he had transformed fear into understanding years ago. "I think that's a beautiful idea," she said, "and I think she would approve." The following spring brought new life to Pine Hollow, both literally and figuratively. The Guardian Initiative, launched with seed funding from National Geographic following the publication of Noah's photographs and essay, quickly gained support from conservation organizations worldwide. The small research center expanded to include an education campus, where children from urban areas could experience direct, respectful encounters with wildlife under careful supervision. On the day of the official opening ceremony, visitors from around the world gathered in the village square. Scientists, conservationists, politicians, and media crowded together with local residents who had witnessed the extraordinary story from its beginning. Noah, now 14 and standing taller than his mother, took the podium with the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. As he surveyed the gathered crowd, he felt a momentary flutter of nervousness, quickly calmed by the sight of familiar faces: Dr. Thornton, Connor Adams, Michael Hayes, Lily Morgan, and all the others who had been part of this journey from the beginning. 8 years ago, he began, his voice clear in the spring air, I was a frightened child, alone in the dark, and a wild bear chose to stand guard at my door until help arrived. He paused, allowing the extraordinary nature of this statement to settle over the audience. Science has offered many explanations for this behavior: territorial patterns, misplaced maternal instincts, coincidental timing. But none of these explanations fully capture what happened that night, or what has happened in our community since. Noah gestured toward the forest edge, where the Pine Hollow Preserve stretched into the distance. In the years since that night, we've documented over 20 instances of bears in this region, displaying behaviors that challenge our understanding of wildlife cognition and interspecies relationships. We've seen multiple generations adopt strategies for peaceful coexistence with humans, strategies that appear to be taught rather than instinctive. We've witnessed the emergence of what researchers now call a neutral zone ecosystem, where multiple species, including traditional predators and prey, interact with reduced aggression. His young face grew solemn. But beyond the scientific data, we've experienced something more profound. A reminder that the boundaries we create between human and wild, between conscious and instinctive, between moral and amoral action, may be far more permeable than we once believed. As he spoke, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Following their gaze, Noah turned toward the forest edge, where a remarkable sight greeted him. Standing at the tree line, clearly visible yet maintaining a respectful distance, were 3 adult black bears, each with the distinctive white chest patch that had once marked only a single individual. Beside them, several cubs watched the human gathering with curious eyes. "Her legacy," Noah said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed silence that had fallen over the crowd. Not just genetic, but behavioral. She changed something here, started something new. The Guardian Initiative exists to understand and protect that legacy, not by controlling or domesticating wildlife, but by learning from them, by recognizing that coexistence requires adaptation on both sides. The bears remained at the forest edge throughout the ceremony, their presence a powerful affirmation of everything Noah described. When the formal proceedings concluded, the crowd dispersed slowly, many lingering to observe this unprecedented display from a respectful distance. Dr. Thornton joined Noah and Savannah as they walked toward the new education center, her expression thoughtful. "In 30 years of wildlife research, I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "Those bears came deliberately, stayed visible throughout your speech, and maintained a perfect safe distance. It's as if they were attending the ceremony," Savannah finished for her, a smile playing at her lips, "honoring her memory in their own way." Noah nodded, his eyes bright with emotion and purpose. She taught them more than just survival. She taught them a different way of being in relation to us, and that's what we have to protect. Not just the individual animals or the habitat, but the new relationship that's developing here. As the years passed, Pine Hollow's story spread far beyond its modest boundaries, inspiring similar initiatives in communities around the world where humans and wildlife shared increasingly overlapping territories. The Guardian Initiative expanded, developing programs that combined traditional ecological knowledge with cutting-edge science to reimagine conservation as relationship rather than management. Noah Marshall grew into a young man whose unique perspective bridged multiple worlds. Respected in scientific circles for his rigorous research, embraced by indigenous communities for his understanding of traditional knowledge systems, and sought after by media for his ability to translate complex ecological concepts into stories that touched hearts and changed minds. On his 18th birthday, as he prepared to leave for university, having been accepted to several prestigious programs in wildlife biology and conservation, Noah made a final visit to the clearing, where Connor Adams had recorded the mother bear's passing 4 years earlier. The site had become something of a pilgrimage spot for him, a place to reconnect with the extraordinary being who had shaped his life's direction. The clearing looked different in summer, lush with wildflowers and buzzing with insect life, sunlight dappling through the canopy overhead. Noah settled on a fallen log, opening his grandfather's journal, now filled with years of his own observations and reflections. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said aloud, feeling slightly self-conscious but compelled to speak as if she could hear him. "But I'll be back. The work we started here will continue." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of wild honeysuckle. Noah closed his eyes, allowing himself to remember fully the night that had changed everything. The fear he had felt alone in the darkened house, the strange comfort of knowing she stood guard outside, the wonder of understanding, even as a child, that something extraordinary was happening. When he opened his eyes, a movement at the clearing's edge caught his attention. A young black bear with a white chest patch, one of the third generation descended from his bear, stood watching him with curious eyes. There was no fear in her posture, no aggression, just a calm assessment that reminded Noah powerfully of her ancestor. "Hello," he said softly, remaining still on his log. The bear made no sound in response, but neither did she retreat. Instead, she settled comfortably at the clearing's edge, her posture relaxed but alert, maintaining the respectful distance that had become characteristic of Pine Hollow's unique bear population. For nearly an hour, they shared the clearing in comfortable silence, the young man writing in his journal, the young bear occasionally foraging for berries, but always returning to her watchful position. Two beings, different in form and nature, yet connected by an extraordinary legacy of protection and respect. As the afternoon waned, Noah finally closed his journal and stood, preparing to make his way back to the village. The bear watched his movements without alarm, her intelligent eyes tracking his progress across the clearing. At the opposite edge, Noah paused and looked back. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for all he felt, but finding no better ones to offer. The bear made a soft huffing sound, neither threatening nor fearful, but acknowledgement. Then, with the fluid grace that still amazed Noah after years of observation, she rose and slipped back into the forest depths, her white chest patch visible for just a moment more, before she vanished among the shadows. Noah smiled, a deep peace settling over him as he turned toward home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new landscapes, new discoveries. But the foundation laid here, in this small village where a wild bear had once chosen to guard a frightened child, would remain his touchstone, his guiding truth in a world that too often forgot the profound connections binding all living things. As he walked the familiar trail back to Pine Hollow, Noah thought about the essay he had written years ago for National Geographic, particularly its conclusion, which had resonated with readers worldwide. There are moments when the boundaries we create between species fall away, revealing a deeper truth about our shared existence on this planet. In those moments, we glimpse possibilities for relationship that transcend our limited understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and moral action. The bear who guarded my door that night showed me that protection can cross the lines we draw between human and wild. Her legacy continues in every bear cub who learns to coexist rather than conflict, in every human who chooses respect over fear, and in every community that reimagines conservation as relationship rather than management. In her choice to protect a vulnerable child who was not her own, she offered us all a new vision of what might be possible. A world where the divide between human and wild becomes not a barrier, but a bridge. The sun was setting as Noah reached the edge of the village, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. Pine Hollow lay before him, transformed from the struggling community of his childhood into a vibrant model of human-wildlife coexistence. The research center's lights glowed warmly against the gathering dusk, while visitors and residents mingled in the village square, sharing stories of the day's wildlife sightings. Savannah waited for him on the porch of their home, somehow knowing this would be his final stop before they departed for the airport in the morning. As Noah approached, she saw in his expression the peace that had eluded him in the weeks leading up to this transition. "You said goodbye," she said softly, not as a question, but as an understanding. Noah nodded, joining her on the porch swing that had witnessed so many of their conversations over the years. Not goodbye exactly, more like, "See you later." Savannah smiled, wrapping an arm around her son's shoulders that now towered above her own. "You'll carry her with you, you know. Wherever you go, whatever you discover, that connection remains." Noah leaned into his mother's embrace, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. The extraordinary bond forged that night 8 years ago had transcended physical presence, even transcended life and death. It lived on in the work he would do, in the community that had been transformed, and in the generation of bears who had inherited a new way of relating to their human neighbors. "I know," he said quietly, "and that makes all the difference." As night fell fully over Pine Hollow, stars appearing like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky, mother and son remained on the porch, sharing memories and dreams in equal measure. From the forest beyond the village came the occasional soft sounds of nocturnal life, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of deer moving through underbrush, the distant, gentle huffing of bears foraging in the moonlight. All was as it should be, wild and human, separate yet connected, each honoring the boundaries that allowed both to thrive. And in that balanced coexistence lay the true miracle of Pine Hollow, not just the extraordinary night when a bear had guarded a human child, but the years of patient, respectful relationship building that had followed, creating a model for a world increasingly in need of such stories of hope and connection. "Tomorrow's a big day," Savannah said finally, as the night grew cool around them. "We should get some rest." Noah nodded, rising with reluctance from the familiar comfort of the porch swing. But as they turned to enter the house, he paused, looking back toward the forest one last time. In the silver moonlight, he thought he glimpsed a shadow moving at the tree line, larger than it should be, watching with patient eyes that held ancient wisdom and newfound understanding. "Good night," he whispered to all that was wild and watching. "Thank you for everything." And somewhere in the forest depths, as if in answer, came a soft, rumbling sound. Neither greeting nor farewell, but acknowledgement of a connection that would endure, even as the distance grew. A reminder that some bonds, once formed, transcend the ordinary limitations of species and language, creating bridges where once only boundaries existed.